All right, so looking at chapter 4 here in PFT 120, we've got the fitness assessment side of things. So we want to be able to understand the importance of our subjective information and objective information. You guys know that we always have to kind of break that down. I know the definitions are pretty clear by this point for those of you who have been through this a couple times, but it is one of the ways that they love to ask you test questions about that kind of stuff. And so it's just one of those things we always need to just take a quick pit stop on and review. We also want to be able to sort of, by the end of this PowerPoint, be able to navigate the entire assessment process, be able to understand how to administer like an effective fitness assessment and questionnaire, and then any of the special considerations that we need to make for our youth clients. So, I always like to kind of remind everybody whenever we're talking about fitness assessments that personal training is basically, if you were to break down like what our role is, it's basically got 3 steps that are very similar to the classic sort of problem solving method, right? Step 1 is you need to very clearly identify the problem. Step 2, you need to solve that problem. And step 3, you need to implement the solution. And so, by identifying the problem, you're going to do an integrated fitness assessment where you're going to look at all of the things about your client, should you put someone on a weight loss routine? Well, first you should test their BMI and their body fat percentage. And then that will help you determine like whether or not they fall inside or outside of normal ranges. And then also through doing an assessment, there's a questionnaire portion. You can ask your client, like, what do they want to do? What's important to them? Or like maybe through the assessment, you're like, well, what stretches should I give my client, right? Should I, stretch out their calves? Should I stretch out their hip flexors, their lats, their chest? Like, what's the deal here? And so then if you notice that someone has like a really, sort of rounded shoulders and a forward head posture, well, yeah, we need to spend time stretching out the pectoralis major, the latissimus dorsi, the upper trapezius, the neck muscles, right? We need to stretch all of those things. And then, what exercises do I give my client? Like, what do I need to strengthen? Well, with a client with a forward head posture and rounded shoulders, strengthening their serratus, strengthening their upper back muscles, like their trapezius muscles, their rhomboids, things like that. So it does like a good amount of the work for you when you do like an integrated fitness assessment, because step 2 is all about solving the problem. And how are you going to solve a problem? Well, you're going to write out like an effective program, I'll show you just really quickly here. I'll pull up like an example. This is the newest routine that I wrote for my client here. And you can see like, for the most part, like it's kind of a blend of things, right? You can see some of these things I've got are going to be static stretch versions where she's doing a little bit of foam rolling. And then we've got some active stretches in here as well. And then even some dynamic stretches in this section here. And so, I'm kind of blending some different concepts together. And that's sort of a more advanced approach to program design and sort of how things will work, honestly, when you guys get into the room. I mean, we don't really practice it that way here at Sochi because like, we're trying to like, the versions of programs that I have you guys write are designed to kind of help you learn concepts that you can conjure up like when you're taking your test and stuff. But in the real world, yeah, you're going to blend some stuff together. You can see here I actually removed the core balance reactive section and I put some core and balance stuff into their overall workout. And then why did I do like a bent over Y fly? Well, she has a little bit, this exercise in particular here is going to be really good for her with her thumbs up because like she does have sort of weak lower trapezius muscles, and that's a really good trapezius exercise. So I identified that she has sort of a rounding problem in her shoulders, and then she has like a little bit of like shoulder pain every now and then. And I solved that problem by throwing, bent over Y flies into her program. So when I designed it, when I solved the problem, now all we need to do is get her to do it. And that's where we, train our clients and we implement that solution. So these are your training sessions here. This is where you're writing the program, and you can't do any of that until you've done a thorough fitness assessment. And so that's what we are sort of looking at here. So when we're talking about fitness assessments, right, it should always be your first step. The goal of any like beginning personal training sort of relationship is that it should always begin with an integrated fitness assessment. This allows you to gather adequate data so that your client, doesn't just do like a random workout. Now, don't get me wrong, like if you were to like who in here has ever done like a deck of cards workout? Has anybody ever done that? Deck of cards workout? Maybe ever tried that? Okay, I was gonna say, I guess that's nobody.
No.
Never tried it, but seen it before.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I don't hate it, you know. I think it can be kind of, and there's actually, you can even buy it now. You know, people have actually made these things. I think I saw one of these guys on Shark Tank. Deck of cards workout. Yeah, I think I saw this like on Shark Tank and stuff. And it was like, basically you just draw like random cards out. Here's the thing, it ends up being a pretty decent workout. It's not bad, you know, but it will never be as good as something that is like super specific to your clients. You know what I mean? Like we want to make sure that we are being specific to our clients, writing the things that they need, you know. Bay, you and I probably have very different goals in terms of like how we're going to design a program for ourselves. Thomas, you know, both the Thomases on the call, you guys probably have different goals from each other, you know, like everybody's going to be a little bit different in terms of like how we sort of approach this, you know. We've all got a different thing. Most of my goals are sort of prioritized around like, you know, being able to play ultimate and stuff. Other people's, my roommates' goals are to look a very specific way, you know. It's really funny. If you ever talk to him, he's in good shape. But if you ever talk to him, it's like, so what are your strength goals? He's like, oh, I have no strength goals. He's like, this is all for show. And I'm like, that's honest. I appreciate honesty, you know, that's great. So that's, you know, that's something that we're kind of looking at here, but you can't figure any of that out if you haven't done an effective fitness assessment with your client, right? So fitness assessments are great because they allow us to sort of identify baseline statistics about our clients. You know, I can figure out exactly how much weight to have you lift if I have tested you to your maximum. You know, if you can lift 100 pounds at the very most for one repetition, and I want you to be at 70% of that, well, that's a pretty easy bit of math. You know, 100 times 0.7, boom, we're going to lift 70 pounds, right? And that should correspond with about 12 to maybe 15 repetitions, depending on the client. So that's going to give us our baseline values. And it also gives us something to kind of compare to later. It's also going to identify any possible contraindications, you know? So like the things that you need to avoid with your client. So for instance, if my client has severe vertigo, right? So vertigo is like a condition where like you'll get really, really dizzy. You basically lose your orientation and your brain can't figure out what is up and what is down. And so it makes people extremely, extremely dizzy, right? So if I've got a client who has really extreme vertigo, doing something like crunches, where they're moving their head up and down and back and forth like this, it's probably not the most, you know, effective thing in the world. That's probably an exercise that I probably want to avoid. That's what's known as a contraindication, right? It should be avoided for that client. And then it also determines like a starting point in progression, you know. I'm going to determine like where my client is and where they're starting so that I know where to like sort of progress towards. So when it comes to fitness assessments, you are always, always, always going to want to start with your subjective information, which is any information that basically cannot be measured. The two major components of subjective information on your NASM are going to be your PAR Q. That's the first thing that you always want to get, and your general medical history questionnaire, right? So the PAR Q, if we take a look at it, is this little document right here. And it's basically a bunch of questions related to the cardiorespiratory system. And if your client indicates that they have problems with any part of that cardiorespiratory system, then we need to make sure that like we are keeping ourselves safe, but also keeping the client safe by saying, you know what, it's very important that you go get like a doctor's note before we actually like continue training, right? So the PAR-Q is going to help you identify whether or not your client is suited towards like the actual physical activity that you're going to put them into. So the PAR-Q, or the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire, is a series of questions related to the cardiorespiratory system that determines whether a client is ready to exercise or not. If they say yes to anything on the PAR-Q, it's important that they consult a physician before actually attempting any exercise. If they say yes to anything, if they say no to everything, great, you're good to go. Like head to the gym floor. But if they say yes to something, it's just like, look, in order to keep myself safe and in order to keep you safe, I want to make sure, that we have doctor's clearance before we actually engage in this, sort of exercise routine, because you don't want to have your client have like a heart attack once they go on like the gym floor and anything like that. And you can see like the PAR-Q has gotten a little bit more complicated over the years. But if they say no to everything, like you can see this little green box here, you're good to go, Faye, you got a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm driving while I have a question. The PAR-Q form, is that something NASM will provide to me? Or
Yeah.
how do I retrieve that?
Absolutely. So this is available on their website. If you go to nasm.org and like down here at the bottom, there are the permanent links down here. You don't have to go into like the menu up here that's changing all the time. You just go down to like the permanent links down here under downloads. There's all kinds of like, there's little mini courses that you can download here. There's little webinars. But the big one is like, here's your PAR-Q, here's your lifestyle and medical history questionnaire. Here's a body composition assessment. I'm basically going to download all of these today from this website while we're going through this lesson. So yeah, that's a good question. So these
perfect. Perfect. So you will have it on the email or link so that I'll be able to download every, or how do I
have before, but I will today. Yeah, since you asked for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, just to make it my life easier. Okay, thank you.
You don't have to go hunting. Also, you can see here, this is kind of fun. Take a look at this, guys. Oh, they changed the colors. Here's the CES templating side of things. This is something that Mo's gonna give you guys when you get to capstone. Here's the sort of like the OPT template changes ever so slightly. You can see instead of saying like flexibility and then like movement prep, instead it's kind of built around the idea of how to get your client like stretched out in some ways and strengthened in others. Get the underactive stuff turned on and get the overactive stuff turned off. And then here you can see here's the programming template that we use in class, right? The warm up, the skill development and all that kind of stuff is what they're calling it now. But and then over here you can see here's the annual program design that we were using when we met up last time, right? So all of that stuff is available on their site in case you ever do lose it out of your email or something. And then there's some really fun little podcast stuff. There's a lot of really cool stuff they've got on here. I actually here's another little form that I actually don't talk about very often, but here's like a sample form if you want to take like pictures of your client and use them for like promo materials. This is a testimonial like photo release form where your client can sign that and now it's like legal to use their pictures and stuff. So anyway, they do have a lot of resources on there. So if your client does answer yes to anything, you're going to move on to pages 2 and 3. And this is where we're going to get a little bit more advanced about the kinds of questions that we ask, about specific diseases. Like, do you have arthritis, osteoporosis, back problems, any types of cancers, cardiovascular condition? Do you currently have high blood pressure? So very similar to the questions we already asked, except that we're just getting a little bit more specific about it. Like you can see, like, this one's about, coronary conditions, and then there's sort of like 4 sub questions, and if they, still say yes to everything, like if they don't meet the requirements there, well, then it's like, hey, like they can sign this sheet here. Like if they choose to sign it and they say like, look, I don't have a doctor's note, but I still want to engage in exercise today. They can sign the release form and that will keep you like legally safe. I still think that it's one of those things where it's like, look, get the doctor's note. It's just not that hard. And then, you know, sometimes whenever we talk about stuff like this, sometimes people worry, well, what if they say, yeah, I've got doctor.
So, and then that's also included. Just
What's that? The other pages of the PAR-Q? Oh, sorry. I think that might have been something else. Oops. Dang it. So if they say yes standing on that PAR-Q, and they're like, they still want to engage in exercise, that's where the second part of the sheet comes in. But what if, you know, so whenever we talk about stuff like this, there is obviously like the question of like, well, what if somebody does have a heart attack during their session and they said they got permission from their doctor, but like, you know, later they decide that they want to like try to like sue me or something. First off, this will probably never happen. But well, that's the thing. You asked with the PAR-Q, you asked them, it's like, look, do you have a medical condition? If they did not disclose information, you were working from an ignorant place. Like you didn't know of the conditions they actually have because they did not give you an accurate representation of where they are. That's not on you. If they try to like take you to task, you're covered, guys. Like that's what we use the PAR-Q for. It's a legal binding document that not only protects the client by, you know, making sure that we don't push them into a place that they shouldn't be in, but it also protects us legally by making sure that we did our due diligence. We did everything that we had to do in order to ensure that like our client was safe and ready for exercise. Because yeah, maybe something does happen. I actually had a client have a heart attack during one of my classes one time. I was teaching a group exercise cardiovascular class where it was basically like a HIIT interval training class. And he kind of flags me over and he's like, hey, I'm getting some heartburn. And I was like, ooh, all right, well, let's take it easy. And, you know, just go ahead and try to like bring your heart rate down slowly. I want you to kind of relax and cool down. Called the front desk and was like, hey, can we, you know, get a van ready? We're going to take so-and-so down to urgent care. And so I was like, you know, he walked down there, he goes to urgent care. It turns out he had like a minor blockage in his heart. And, you know, if he had decided to say like, oh, Brad was running that class too hard, you know, there's no version of the world where I would ever get in trouble for that. Because legally I was very, 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 very protected because he had signed, you know, paperwork saying like, you know, I'm taking my health into my own hands. He didn't convey to me that he had a heart condition, so I had no idea of that, you know, because he didn't know about it either. And for the record, like this guy's doing great. He literally, it was a very, very minor blockage. It's what is known as, I can't remember what the term is, but it's like an angel heart. It's like a guardian angel heart attack or something like that is what they'll sometimes call it. And it's where it's so minor that it's actually like, you know, the fact that you even had symptoms is actually awesome because then it allows you to catch the problem before it ever becomes like very serious and is actually like deadly. So he like is incredibly grateful that this happened and that, you know, he was able to catch it and make like changes in his life. And now that dude he moved out here from the East Coast after coming to the resort. He moved out here and now lives out here and he's like a life coach. So, you know, that's actually something that happened, but that's what the PAR-Q is for. It is sort of a legal contract that is designed to kind of keep you safe. There is also the general/medical history questionnaire. So this is another one, Bay, that I'll attach later today, but you can see here, they're calling it the lifestyle and health history questionnaire, but you know, it's going to have all your clients like normal information at the top there, physician's name and phone number. And then it's going to be questions about like their diet and exercise and sort of what their life looks like, right? And this is subjective information as well. Remember, when we say subjective information, we mean like information that cannot be measured, right? Well, you know, I can't necessarily measure how, you know, I can't necessarily measure what my client's occupation is, right? They can tell me what it is and it can inform my, you know, decisions when it comes to like picking exercises and stuff. But like, I can't necessarily like measure this. This is still very much subjective, or like what my client's goals are, you know, how much do you want to gain muscle? You know, like it's difficult to sort of measure that. And so we'll put a little bit of a number on it sometimes, but for the most part, This is very subjective stuff, but you can see it's like, how many days a week do you get at least 60 minutes of moderate intensity exercise? When it comes to your diet on a scale of 0 to 10, how healthy do you consider your diet? What about your salt intake? Would you say that's low or medium or high? So we get a very clear idea. And if our client, earlier says that they are struggling with hypertension, and then we look at their diet and we see that it's very high in salt and sugar and fat, it's like, all right, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. That sugar is going to lead to abdominal fat, which is going to raise blood pressure. The salt is going to harden the arteries, which is going to raise blood pressure. And then the excessive fat is going to clog the arteries, which is going to raise the blood pressure. So there we go, right? We've got a pretty clear idea. All of this is sort of painting in the picture, right? I always like to think of objective information, which is the very measurable stuff, right? It's like, how fast can you run a mile? That's a number, right? That's a very objective, measurable piece of information. I always like to think of the objective information as the what. It's like the current status of our client. And I like to think of the subjective information as the why. It's sort of the story behind how they got there, right? If somebody has tight calf muscles and I noticed that like they can only dorsiflex by X number of degrees, and it's like, oh man, you should be able to dorsiflex more than that. But because their calves are really tight, they just can't. I can measure that, right? That's a very the status, their current status is like, yeah, you get tight calf muscles. How did they get there? Well, then I asked them about their lifestyle history questionnaire, and it turns out they wear elevated heels to work every single day. And it's like, well, that'll do it. If you're in this plantar flexed position for 8 hours a day at work, yeah, you're definitely going to have like tighter calf muscles. So, you can see here we've got some diet and exercise questions at the top, and then we get into their lifestyle. Like, do you feel like you get enough sleep? Do you smoke tobacco? What is your occupation? Does your occupation require extended periods of sitting? If it does, that probably means that they have tight hip flexors, because if they're sitting all day, they're in a hip flexed position. Does your occupation require repetitive movements? If yes, explain. If they're doing the same type of movements every day, that can cause tightness in like maybe rotator cuff muscles. Does it require to wear shoes with a heel? That's going to tighten up the calves, right? Do they have any like musculoskeletal injuries? If they do, that could mean that there's scar tissue in certain areas, and so I'm going to look for tightness in those areas. If they've had surgery, that could lead to scar tissue. Do they have any chronic health conditions that I need to be aware of that maybe aren't necessarily something that was covered in the PAR-Q? Or are they on any medications? We know beta blockers will lower our clients' blood pressure. It'll lower their heart rate, right? So those pieces of information are very, very, very valuable. And that's sort of what we're looking at when we talk about subjective stuff, right? So when it comes to youths, it's probably questions about like sports and hobbies. It's like, what are you into? And they're like, Spider-Man. It's like, I get that, with kids, it's probably a little bit more basic, but it is still very important. This is still going to be valuable information. No matter who the client is, knowing a little bit about their general and medical history is going to give you insight into, again, how they kind of got to where they are status wise. So any questions on subjective information?
It's all good.
Cool. Well, let's look at the objective stuff, right? So objective information. This is the stuff we can measure, right? This is the highly measurable stuff. So we are looking at a lot of different categories here, right? So this is typically number-based data. For instance, we're looking at heart rate, right? That's the number of beats in 60 seconds. Very, sort of number-based thing here, right? So there's going to be several different categories. We're going to look at physiologic assessments. We're going to look at body composition assessments, cardiorespiratory assessments, performance assessments, posture assessments, which is probably my favorite. And we're going to kind of work our way through those. And so those are all the different types of objective stuff. But like I said, it's very measurable information. So if we look at NASM's like forms here, you can see the first one we've got here. Actually, I don't want to start with that one. There's the cardiovascular one. So here's a cardiorespiratory assessment. So we throw our client's name on there. And then before we leave the desk, well, let's imagine we're going through this assessment process, right? Your client walks to the door, you introduce yourself like, hi, my name is so-and-so, welcome to whatever gym I'm working at. let's go ahead and take you over here. We're going to run you through an assessment today. But first, I want to gather a little bit of information. So we ask them all that subjective stuff, right? We work our way through that questionnaire. We get really clear idea of sort of what their current status is and things like that. And then it's like, okay, great, like you're killing it. Now, we're going to head to the gym floor, but before we do, I want to start getting a little bit of hard data information. I want to get a little bit of info about how your cardiovascular system is performing. So before they leave the desk, we're going to get their resting heart rate. Now, remember, there's a lot of different versions of heart rates out there, right, guys? There is a ton of different versions of like how we are going to use different heart rate numbers. But we need to start with the resting heart rate, which is their heart rate while they are completely at rest. And luckily, they've been sitting as we've gone through this interview process. And so this is a good time to get that resting heart rate without having to be like, all right, we'll sit here for 5 minutes so that your heart rate comes down and then we can get your rest. It's like, we don't have to do that, right? God dang it, I got stuck over that freaking thing. So as we look at it, right, we're going to start with understanding like the different versions of the heart rate. So your heart rate, by definition, it's the number of beats in 60 seconds, right? It's the number of beats per minute, or BPMs, right? And the first one we're going to get is the resting heart rate, or your heart rate rest, right? This is a client's heart rate while they are in a completely restful state. Now, obviously, the actual resting heart rate should be like, you know, as you wake up in the morning before your feet hit the ground. But, you know, we're not going to be, it's not like we're going to like camp out at our client's place and, you know, get that number in the morning. So the best way that we can do it is just have them sit for about 5 minutes and relax and then gather that number. So that's your resting heart rate. Now, we also want to gather their heart rate max, or their max heart rate. And that's always going to be the same formula. That is going to be, in order to determine their max heart rate, it's an estimation of, you know, the highest number we really want to take their heart rate to. And again, this is just like a 1 rep max. You know, like when we think about like what a 1 rep max is, you know, I want you to exercise at a certain percentage of your heart rate max. Again, if you can lift 100 pounds and I want you to lift at 50% of that, 100 times 50% is going to be 50 pounds. So I use it to determine how much stress I'm going to give you during the workout. Because if I want you to lift, you know, 20 repetitions, I only want your 1 rep max to be somewhere between like 50 and 60%. But if I wanted you to gain like maximal strength and only do maybe 3 reps, well, I'd have you lift somewhere around 90% of your 1 rep max. So it's how, you know, by understanding the maximum, we can work out at a percentage of that maximum to make sure that we're targeting the right style of workout. So the same thing applies to cardiovascular exercise. If I want you to have like, you know, an endurance style cardio workout, well, then I'm going to make you only exercise somewhere between 65 and 75% of your heart rate max, because that means that you can keep that pace up pretty much indefinitely. But let's say I want you to get out of breath because I'm trying to improve your peak capacity. Well, then I might have you exercise at like 90% of your heart rate max. So if that's the case, I need to know what your heart rate max is. And the formula for that is going to be the same for all of our clients. It's going to be the number 220 minus their age. Okay. So for me, I'm 33 years old, right? So 220 minus 33, and I hit the wrong freaking button because I have fat fingers. 220 minus 33, that's going to be 187, right? So that's 187 is my heart rate max. So if I wanted to be at 75, so let's say 80% of that, right? So times 0.8, that means that my target heart rate would be about 150, 149.6. We'll round that up to 150. Right? So that's why we need to figure out the heart rate max. It's 220 minus your age. Everybody here, get this formula memorized. I don't want you guys to forget this. This is almost guaranteed to be a test question at some point on your actual exam. They'll say, which of the following formulas is, you know, heart rate max, or what this formula, 220 minus your age, is the blank formula, and you need to, you know, figure it out. So 220 minus the age. Now, it's good. I don't hate the heart rate max formula, you know, like that works pretty well. But it's not exactly super accurate to whatever client it is that we're actually training, because like, you know, it's only taking into account their age. So this says that all 33-year-old people are, you know, going to get the exact same target heart rate, you know, and it's not bad to do it that way. It can just be a little bit more specific, right? And that's where we can dive into, which is not on this assessment here, but we can do what is called the heart rate reserve method. And the heart rate reserve method is a little bit different, right? So if we're trying to figure out our client's target heart rate and we use the heart rate max formula, that's pretty simple. Your target heart rate is going to be your heart rate max times, you know, your desired intensity, 65%, 75%, 85%, whatever, right? That's the classic target heart rate max formula. But if we want to be like really specific, like let's say we have one 30-year-old client who's never exercised before. We've got another 30-year-old client who has exercised every day. Their hearts are probably going to be in, you know, they're going to have slightly different capacities. They're both 30. So with the traditional formula, the workout they would get is exactly the same, but that may be too hard for client A and too easy for client B. So instead, we have what is known as the heart rate reserve method. This is also known as the Karvonen formula. And this is a formula that is going to determine your heart rate based on the difference between your max heart rate, the 220 minus your age number, and your resting heart rate, that number that your heart rate was resting at earlier when we were just sitting down. And one thing that we know, if you guys go back to our lesson at the beginning of this mod, if you go back to our lesson on the cardiovascular system, one thing that we know about the heart is, you know, the stronger your stroke volume is, the less often your heart has to beat because you have a higher overall cardiac output. So we can't really measure stroke volume in the middle of the gym. That would be, we would need very complicated equipment to be able to do that. But what we can pay attention to is the heart rate. I can literally test what your pulse is very, very, very easily. So if I test your pulse and I notice that like while you are sitting, that resting heart rate is really low, that means that your heart is having a very easy time delivering blood throughout the body. So it doesn't have to beat that often. And so the number is going to be low. But if your heart's beating really, really high, really, really fast, that indicates to me that your heart's not that strong and it has to beat more often to kind of make up for the lack of blood flow as it's working. So that Karvonen formula, which takes the difference between your resting heart rate, this thing that we just looked at, and your max heart rate, is going to be a much more accurate formula. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to figure out your client's heart rate max, right? So again, for me, that's 220 minus 33, right? And then I'm going to subtract my resting heart rate of about 57 beats per minute. That's going to leave me with the number 130. Now I'm going to multiply that by my desired intensity. So earlier I said 0.8, right? So times 0.8, and that's going to give me the number 104. And then I need to add on that resting heart rate back at the end, right? I need to add the resting heart rate back because I took it out of the formula earlier. So plus 57. So now my target heart rate's 161, whereas last time it was 149 or 150, right? So those are two very different workouts for me. You know, this is pretty gentle. And so for the average 33-year-old, maybe that's pretty good. But for somebody who does like a lot of cardio, like myself, that workout's not really going to be challenging enough. So my 80% is actually a little bit closer to 161. And that's, whoa, I didn't know you can do that. That is why the Karvonen formula is a little bit more accurate. And I don't know what they're going to call it on your test. I apologize. They're either going to call it the heart rate reserve method or they'll call it the Karvonen formula. They kind of use it pretty interchangeably. So just have both of those names memorized. However, they will not ask you to have the formula memorized. That's one thing, because this is just kind of a complex formula. But one thing that they may do on your test is they'll say, the formula to determine target heart rate based on the difference between heart rate max and heart rate rest is describing the blank formula. And you'll need to know, you know, you'll look at the multiple choice options and it'll either be heart rate reserve or Karvonen. So that's how that works. And then obviously we've got blood pressure tests as well. That's another one of our physiologic assessments, right? Blood pressure, the amount of pressure that's on the arterial walls, like, you know, it's the amount of pressure like as your heart contracts, right? That's the systolic reaction, and then there's the diastolic, which is as your heart is relaxing. So there's always some type of pressure pushing on the walls of our blood vessels because they're filled with blood. 120 is the systolic number, which is as the heart is contracting, and 80 is the diastolic number as the heart is relaxing. Now, those numbers are going to be a little bit different in our youth clients, but 120/80 is the number you guys need to know to pass your regular exams. If it ever gets as high as 140/90, that is what we consider to be hypertension or high blood pressure, and that's a disease or condition that we definitely want to work on. So that is what we are looking at there. Now, any questions on physiologic assessments, Karvanen formula, heart rate max formula, target heart rates? Any questions on that before we move into the body composition stuff? Everybody's feeling good? All righty. So taking a look here at body composition assessments. So body composition is, you know, the sort of calculation of like your body fat percentage, right? So this is a really good type of assessment for, you know, determining like whether or not your client is falling into normal healthy weight ranges, whether or not they have excessive body fat compared to like how much they actually weigh, or just looking at their height versus their weight when we're considering like the body mass index, the BMI, right? So it's your weight, it's your body fat percentage, it's your BMI, and it's also your circumference measurements. You know, if you're taking like, you know, if you're trying to like, let's say put on some muscle and you're trying to get like a bigger, you know, like peak bicep or something, right? Well, we need to figure out like what your baseline statistic is, and then we can sort of work our way up from there. So body fat percentage is the big one that we're going to look at with our youthful clients, right? And there's a couple different versions of this out there, right? This is an individual's overall percentage of body fat when compared with their overall weight, right? So there's a couple different ways to do this, but the preferred method is definitely going to be bioelectric impedance. Okay, so bioelectric impedance is going to determine our client's body fat percentage by sending an electric current through the body, right? The slower that current travels, the higher the body fat percentage. The faster that current travels, the lower the body fat percentage. And we're not paying attention to how fast the current travels, but the machine is, you know? And so like, that's how it is sort of estimating body fat. It's not perfect, you know, like if you go to the bathroom beforehand, it'll kind of throw the test off. Or if you have like a lot of water that you're retaining, that'll throw the test off a little bit, but it's not bad. It's a fairly accurate method, and it is something that we kind of want to sort of regularly engage in. We've also got skin fold caliper assessments. This is another way this is going to determine body fat percentage through like measuring subcutaneous fat. So if we look at that, skin fold caliper. Let's see if I can find a picture of what this actually looks like. Images, please. Well, these are all very good pictures of what this actually looks like. I'm trying to find a picture. There we go. So you can actually see here the way this works. There's sort of different versions, right? Like this is a little bit wider, therefore you can see the body fat, you know, the number of millimeters wide is much thicker, right? Whereas this person's a little bit leaner, that's a little bit thinner, right? And so that's how skin fold calipers work. They're not bad. You know, there's a couple different formulas out there. The new edition of the textbook, for instance, actually has like 4 or 5 different options for you guys to use. But like generally, you're just going to measure in whatever those sites are and use that formula to kind of figure out like what your client's, you know, body fat percentage is. So if you did the subscapular, you know, the version that we used to use is the what's called the Dernan-Wamersley formula, and it was subscapular, suprailiac, biceps, and triceps. So it was a 4-site method. So you'd write those 4 sites down and then look in your textbook at like the table, and it would tell you, it's like, okay, it was like 10 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 10 millimeters. All of them were 10 millimeters. That's 40 millimeters total. So you go to 40 millimeters. My client's 29 years old. Boom. And that'll tell you their body fat percentage. It's not bad, actually. You'd be surprised how actually accurate skin fold calipers can be. Just make sure you're doing the measurements twice in both sites in order to be like as accurate as possible. But there's other versions out. You can see this is the sort of Jackson Pollock version here. So there's a lot of different versions. My favorite preferred method is definitely just bioelectric impedance. It's just very easy. Throw them on a machine, hit the start button, and it does the body fat percentage for you, and it is still pretty accurate, you know. Now, you can also do circumference measurements, right? Circumference measurements are where you are literally just measuring like overall body girth, and we're looking for changes, you know. Maybe one week it feels like your client's scale weight doesn't go down. You know, they're just like, I don't get it. I was supposed to, you know, drop maybe 2 pounds this week, and it just didn't happen. My scale weight is exactly the same. But then we do their, you know, circumference measurements, and we find that they lost a 1/4 inch on their stomach, and they lost a 1/2 inch in their hips. You know, like it's like, oh, well, your body weight may have stayed the same, but we're very clearly seeing like, you know, changes in your body composition because your circumference measurements are definitely different than they were when we started. The more information you can gather, guys, honestly, the easier it is to keep your client from sort of psychologically jumping off the ledge sometimes. You know, it's very easy for someone to kind of get wrapped up in the numbers. And then when they don't see that scale weight move, it can just feel like it's completely derailing them and that they're not making any progress. And, you know, they can really kind of lose sight of what it is they're trying to accomplish. And we definitely don't want our clients to feel that way, right? We want our clients to feel confident and like they're making a difference, you know. So the more data you can gather, the better. And this is why we really like having circumference and body fat percentage and, you know, posture and this and that, you know, like we've got a lot of different assessments that we can perform. So there are also the athletic side of fitness assessments. You know, there's the cardiorespiratory assessments that are going to help us determine, you know, what type of cardio workout to give our clients. There's movement assessments, which are going to tell us about our client's posture and which muscles are tight and which muscles are weak. And there's performance assessments, which we can use to sort of track our client's progress over time. Oh, what the heck? This so went out of order. I had slides to look at. Oh, that's so annoying. So really quickly, just recapping because it's here. Looking at body composition, right? If we're measuring out our body composition, we're looking at like lean body mass. This isn't just our client's like scale weight, right? Like, again, like if your client's lean body mass is 14%, right? You would take their scale weight and subtract their body fat weight. That's going to give you your lean mass. How do you figure out their body fat weight? Well, we look at that body fat percentage, right? So let's say we've got a client who weighs 200 pounds and they have 30% body fat. So 200 pounds times 0.3, that means that they have 60 pounds of body fat. If we take 200 minus 60, that means that they have a lean body mass of 140 pounds. Now, let's say we're training our client for a couple of weeks and their scale weight drops down to 190 and their body fat percentage drops all the way down to 20%, right? So now they weigh 190 pounds. They've got 20% body fat, which means they only have 38 pounds of fat on their body. So 190 minus 38. So now they have a lean body mass of 152 pounds, which means, you know, they lost, they had 60 pounds of fat originally. They lost 22 pounds of fat and they put on 12 pounds of muscle. That is a huge body composition change, right? And that's why like we really like having these different versions of these formulas, right? And so again, we can use our skin fold calipers and we can use bioelectric impedance to kind of help us determine these things. And like, you know, you'll run into those situations where you'll have a client who they weigh 200 pounds, right? Like I said, they got 30% body fat, right? And then all of a sudden you train them for 4 weeks and their weight starts creeping up or something and they weigh 200 pounds again. But then, and they're like, oh, what the heck? I've been at this diet. I've been at this exercise program. Why am I not losing any weight? And then you test and you do their body fat percentage. And instead of being 38 or 30%, now it's down to 28%. So now they've actually lost 4 pounds of body fat and they've gained 4 pounds of muscle. And so their scale weight stayed exactly the same. But we saw their circumference measurements go down. We saw their body fat percentage come down. We saw their lean body mass go up. These are all really positive changes. Okay. And don't forget, guys, lean body mass is not just muscle mass. It is also like water weight. Lean body mass is also like any water that you do happen to be retaining and stuff. So we got to be cautious with that as well. In sometimes like making sure that people don't think it's just muscle mass. Because sometimes that number will also finally drop after a while. It'll be like, you know, their lean body mass is staying the same, and then also it drops and it's like their body is just like, all right, we can finally get rid of some of this water, you know. So, and like I said, bioelectric impedance is sort of my favorite preferred method. There's also skin fold calipers. Skin fold calipers, though, make sure you're not using them on like majorly senior clients and make sure you're not using them on like majorly obese clients. In both of those scenarios, skin fold calipers start to get pretty inaccurate. All right, so looking at our cardiorespiratory assessments. Now, there are a lot of different versions out there. If we are training youths, though, the Ymca step test, which we've talked about in previous classes, the Rockport test that we talked about in previous classes, these are actually not the best assessments for youth clients because these formulas, the way that we calculate out these numbers is not calibrated to like a young person's heart. And you guys will remember we talked about how like the smaller heart has to beat faster because it has to pump, you know, blood that, you know, the blood cells are the same size, but like obviously the heart's going to be much smaller because our client's body is much smaller, which means that like it has to beat up, it has to beat more often, and those formulas are not calibrated to that. So these are not these two assessments are not really all that great to use with our youth clients. Instead, we're going to use very simple 1 mile walking and running tests, or if our client is younger than that, we could even modify that down to a 1/4 mile or a 1/2 mile run. Sorry, 1 second. What the heck is going on? Lord. Feels like there's an earthquake outside my door. So that is going to be what we see in those fitness assessments. So we're just going to time our clients, right? We're going to time them to see like, are they improving? In fact, one of the other things that I sent in the email the other day is the programming manual here, right? Actually, hold on. I forgot. Is this one dumb? I always get this one mixed up with the weight loss and the senior. Like NASM changed how they. No, okay. It's okay. There's the assessment stuff. If you take a look right here, you can see all the assessment stuff that we talked about, and then right here are our cardiorespiratory assessments. So we can say like what their heart rate max is, you know, 220 minus their age. That formula stays the same, but then we're just going to look and see like what their 1 mile walking and running test is, right? And it's like, all right, you know, Johnny, you're going to run 1 mile and we're going to go boop, and we're going to hit that start button, have them go as fast as they can. You know, if they're 14 years old and they were able to run that thing faster than, you know, 6 minutes and 20 seconds, you know, that's putting them way above the 85th percentile. That's great. That's exactly what we're looking for, you know. And that's sort of how that assessment works. We're basically just looking to see like, you know, how fast they can run 1 mile's distance. And the same thing is true of our female clients, right? A 16-year-old client that can run it slightly faster than 8 minutes and 23 seconds. That's where we want them. You know, that's the 85th percentile. It's a little bit slower than that. That's okay. That means that like, hey, guess what? You know, we did see that you fall just outside of this range here. So we're going to work on your, and we don't have to even tell our youth clients that, you know, we don't have to like relay that information to them, but we know that like, if I'm trying to decide whether or not to prioritize strength training or to prioritize cardio, it's like, okay, we are, you know, not in that 85th, you know, let's try to improve, our cardio. We're going to put some special emphasis on cardio, you know? So that's what we're going to do there, right? So, but really quickly, I do want to show you guys how the YMCA step test works. Let's see here. My favorite one is actually this version here, but I think if I remember right, we watched this one once.
I'm so passionate about the fitness industry because I get to impact, I get to inspire, and I get to change lives every day.
We already bought the NASM. We don't need the commercial.
What is the YMCA step test and how can we use it to assess our cardiorespiratory fitness? I'll answer those questions in today's Simple Truth Fitness Minute. First, don't do this test unless you have clearance from your physician that it's safe to do so. The YMCA step test is a measure of cardiorespiratory fitness based on how quickly your heart rate returns to normal after exercise. It consists of 3 minutes of stepping up and down on a 12-inch step at 96 steps per minute. Search YouTube for metronome 96 beats per minute for the right pace. At 3 minutes, you stop and immediately sit down. And for accurate results, within 5 seconds, start taking your pulse at the wrist or carotid for 1 full minute. The simple truth is the YMCA step test is an easy, quick way to measure your cardiorespiratory fitness. More details, including what to do with your measured heart rate, are provided in the text and links. I'm David Greenwald, and that's today's Simple Truth Fitness Minute.
I love how quick this video is. I'm gonna start showing this one from now on. Let's look at some of the protocols here, right? So we can see he is going
Consists of 3 minutes of step
up, up, down, down, right? He's going like left, right, up, up, down, down, right? And he's going to go for 3 minutes straight. And what you want to do, he said that you want to do it at a metronome of 96 beats per minute. So if we set this to 96 and I hit start here, left, right, up, down, down, which makes me think that this guy's moving a little bit too speedy personally. I'm assuming he did that without an actual metronome. So he's moving a little bit quick. We want to make sure he does they get 96 beats per minute though. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, what's important is that every client who has ever received this assessment is going at the same pace. So if we all go at 96 steps per minute, then we can look at like somebody who's in really good shape. We can look at somebody who's maybe not in such good shape, and we can sort of test the numbers against those things to, you know, figure out like what the ideal numbers should be. And then what you're going to do, and what the important part of this test is actually testing, is it is a cardio assessment. It is a cardio assessment that involves stepping on a specific height step for 3 minutes. That's a 12-inch step at a specific tempo. That's a tempo of 96 steps per minute. And then, this is the important part, measuring how quickly a client's heart rate returns to normal afterwards. So this isn't about like how high their heart rate got during the test. It's about how well their heart rate recovers once the test is over. So if I'm trying to test like how quickly something returns to normal afterwards, and I'm comparing that against other people, I need to make sure that everyone gets the same thing. Here's a weird example. Let's say you want to test how quickly a pot of boiling water returns back to normal. Let's say we want to figure out like when it returns back to like room temperature. Okay, great. Well, then we need to get that, you know, up that pot of water up to boiling, and we need to make sure all the variables are the same. It's the same amount of water in pot A as it is in pot B. We need to make sure that the temperature of the room is same when I measure for pot A, and I need to make sure the temperature is the same for pot B. And I need to make sure that the pot is made out of the same type of metal for both of them, and that's the same volume and the same shape. All of those variables could change how quickly temperature returns back to normal, right? that would be a totally flawed way of experimenting this, right? Same thing is true for our heart. We need to make sure every client has the same height. That's a 12-inch step. We need to make sure that every client moves at the same pace. That's 96 steps per minute. Left, right, up, down, down, or whatever it was actually. I'm not a human metronome. And we need to make sure that like we test their heart rate after the test is over for exactly the same length of time. So everybody goes for 3 minutes, they all turn around, they all sit, and I measure their pulse over the course of 60 seconds. I don't do 10 seconds multiplied by 6. I don't do 6 seconds multiplied by 10. I don't do 30 seconds multiplied by 2. I do it for a full 60 seconds because it's testing their recovery pulse. A client who's in really good cardiovascular shape, their heart rate will be like this. And it'll slow down really quickly until it gets back to like their resting pace. A client who's not in such good shape, they get through the whole time like, and their heart rate just keeps like beating really fast, even after that 1 minute is done. That shows us that that person's heart rate does not recover really quickly. So if they did really well, great, I'm going to give them a hard cardio workout, right? I'm probably going to have them work out at 60, 70% or 70, 80% of their heart rate max, right? So there's tables in your textbook that will help you determine like where you should put your client. If their heart rate recovered really quickly, great. Their heart rate recovered really poorly, all right, great, cool. We can work with that. Or maybe they were right in the middle, right? So everybody's going to get a slightly different style of cardiovascular work. And then the same thing is true of the Rockport walk test, although the protocols are a little bit different. This is a 1 mile walking test that is going to help you estimate your client's VO2 max. And so we are going to measure a bunch of different variables that are going to help us determine how intense of a workout to give our client. So if our client's 33 years old, 200 pounds, their heart rate was 156 at the end of the test, and it took them 16 minutes and 12 seconds. And I hit calculate here, that's not very good, right? They're going to get a poor score. But if we train them for 30 days and all of a sudden it only takes 14 minutes and their heart rate's down to 150, and maybe now they only weigh 190 pounds, this is 4 weeks later. Well, now they're in the average category. Guess what? They had a huge improvement. They drop a little bit more weight. Heart rate comes down even lower. Time drops even lower. And now suddenly they're landing in the good category. So we're looking for like improvements slowly over time, and the Rockport walk test is another one. I personally like the YMCA 3-minute step test because it's very quick. It's very convenient. It takes 3 minutes, takes about 4 minutes, because you got to test their heart rate afterwards. But the Rockport walk test, this is maybe like a 15-20 minute process to kind of get your client set up and then going through the whole thing. That's a little bit slower. However, it is way less impact. The YMCA step test is like, it's 12-inch step up and down. So if you have like an obese client or a senior client, the YMCA step test may not be appropriate for them. And that's where the Rockport comes in. But for today's lesson, like I said, with youth clients, because their hearts are differently shaped, these are not great assessments to do with kids. Instead, we're just going to do a very simple assessment. Hey, how long does it take you to run a mile? That's it. Very simple. Or how long does it take you to run a half mile? Or how long does it take you to run a quarter mile? So any questions on cardiovascular assessments? Questions or comments or concerns? Anybody got questions about what I'm doing this weekend? Okay. I used to ask, when I was a tour guide, I used to always ask that just to like see if people were paying attention. And I would always have like, people who didn't speak like a lick of English on my tours and be like, okay. Let's take a look at our performance assessments. So performance assessments, there are a lot of them out there in your regular textbook. Your regular textbook, you're going to have things like the Davies Test, right? That's an upper body agility assessment. You've got the Sharks skill test. It's a lower body agility assessment. Both of those are really, really, really great. We've also got the 1 rep max test. If I want to figure out how much you can bench press, how much you can deadlift, how much you can squat, how much you can military press, we got 1 rep max assessments for each of those things, right? Those are really great performance assessments. How fast can you run a 40? You know, how fast can you get through like a left test if the cones are 20 yards apart? Millions of them out there, right? Look at the NFL Combine. It's all performance assessments. How high can you jump? You know, whatever. Youths, though, again, it's going to be a little bit more endurance based. So we're going to have what is called the 90-degree push-up test. And this is, like I said, did I keep that manual open? Close it. Oh, dummy. So we look over here at our strength assessment, and it's really simple. It's like the right angle push-up test. And what that means is your client gets into push-up position, and they are going to do as many push-ups as they can, and you're going to write the number down. Pretty freaking simple, right? Now, there are some protocols for how to do this specifically. If we look in our book here, you know, if we look at our book, the protocols for how to do the right angle push-up test, it's very similar to just like doing as many push-ups as you can, but we do actually have a specific tempo here. They basically want to perform 1 rep every 3 seconds. So again, you can actually use a metronome. Am I on Bing? Oh no, how dare you. So we could go to a metronome here. 1 beat every 3 seconds. That's going to be, oh, I actually can't do it. Oh, that's so funny. I'll have to use not Google. Here's a 20 BPM metronome. This is going to be really slow sounding. One 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. I moved a little fast. Anyway, so you know that's how you can do that. You can also just count it out for your clients, right? But 1 repetition every 3 seconds until they can't do anymore. Let me tell you, by the way, that's a little bit harder. Like for for you guys that are out there like watching this and you're like, oh, I'm curious how many I can do. Try doing it at a rate of 1 every 3 seconds. It is way harder than it seems. And so that's kind of a fun variation. Now you can also do that modified. Just make sure if you do, you write it down on your client's assessment sheet. So that is a performance assessment for our youth clients. We've also got the sit-up test, okay, or the curl-up test, okay, and that's how many sit-ups your clients can do in 1 minute's time. Now that one, it's about how many you can do, and then we give it, you know, the push-up test is go until you can't do anymore, right? So there's no time limit. The curl-up test is as many as you can do in 1 minute's time, which means you don't have a tempo here. You are going to go as fast as you can, okay? So you're going to have them lay on the ground, have them flex their knees. Their feet should be about 12 inches from their butt, their heels, that is. So make sure that you put their heels in the same spot every time. We're trying to limit the variables here to make sure that this test is always consistent, you know, because if your client has their feet way out here one time and then in here the next time, all of a sudden they're like, you know, they do worse on their assessment. That could be because we weren't being specific enough. They're going to cross their arms across their chest like this, elbows in close, and they are going to, you are then going to hold their feet. And so you make sure their feet stay in place, and they're going to rise up and touch their elbows to their thighs. And then they're going to drop back down to the ground, and you're going to measure how many they can get. Now, you might be looking at that and saying like, well, how do we know that like one assessment, oh, that's why I didn't actually close it earlier. It was because it was on Bing and I didn't see that coming. Got it. So it's how many they can do in 1 minute's time. You know, you might be thinking it's like, well, what if their thighs are longer than someone else's? Remember, guys, this is a performance assessment. This is not them versus somebody else. This isn't a cardiorespiratory assessment that's determining, you know, how well they performed versus the rest of their population. This is just them versus future them. So we don't really care. As long as their heels are 12 inches away from their butt, and as long as their feet are being held down, and as long as they're keeping their hands in the same spot every time while they're doing this, and their elbows are touching their thighs, them versus future them, all of those variables are going to be the same, you know, unless they went through like some major growth spurt and all of a sudden they're, you know, 6 inches taller. And so the curl up test is, you know, going to help us just look for improvements over time. It's like, hey, the first day we trained you, we got 12 push-ups. Now we're at 24. That's twice, you are twice as strong in your chest as you were the last time, right? Your curl up test, we got like 32 crunches in, but this time you get 50. You know, that's a massive improvement. So this is just them versus future them. There's nobody we're comparing this to. And then there's the standing long jump test, which is a really fun one. And the way that that one works is you are basically going to mark on the ground and then have your client stand with their feet shoulder width apart. They're going to squat down and jump as far forward as they can, and you're going to measure how far they went. Make sure you do at least 3 repetitions, and you're going to keep the best score, which will usually be the last one on average, you know. So that's the standing long jump test. And again, we get that information and we write it down. Now, this stuff is not on your regular textbook. You're not going to find these 3 assessments for adults, but do you guys think you could apply this to adults? Of course you can, right? If you've got time to do this kind of stuff, go for it. I love to test these kind of things with my clients. It's freaking tough, you know? And let me tell you guys, just professional piece of advice here. If your assessment is tough, it really does kind of set the pace for when your clients, you know, it makes, you know, a lot of times people are using your assessment as your sales pitch, you know, like you get this free assessment and then that's your chance to kind of connect with someone and then convince them that they want to sign up for personal training with you, right? So I love to make sure that my fitness assessments leave somebody going home like a little sweaty and they're like, man, that was a great workout. And I love to be like, that wasn't the workout. That was the assessment that will tell me how to write the workout. And then they're like, oh my God, you know, like it does kind of give you a little bit of mystery, you know, it kind of sets the tone a little bit. So if you go through the overhead squat and the single leg stuff and you've got extra time at the end, put them through these tests and that'll make them even more sore the next day, which will make them go, gosh, if they kicked my butt that bad in the assessment, I definitely want to work with this person for their workouts, right? Imagine what they can do, you know? Imagine if we didn't have to spend 20 minutes doing all that subjective paperwork first, what a good workout it would have gotten, you know, like that's kind of the tone you want to set. So any questions on performance assessments before we move into our last category here? We're going to go ahead and talk about movement assessments next. Any questions there?
No questions.
So movement assessments, posture assessments, right? So posture is, you know, the sort of baseline from which we, you know, we do all of our movements from, right? And so like ideally we want our posture to be at optimal alignment. We want our bones to rest in the positions they're supposed to rest in. We want our muscles to be at the lengths we want them to be at. You know, not only is this going to increase our performance, it's also going to reduce our risk of injury. So we've got 5 main kinetic chain checkpoints that we are going to pay attention to when it comes to analyzing posture. We're going to look at the foot and ankle complex, the knees, the lumbopelvic hip complex, the shoulders, and cervical spine, right? So the neck. So those are sort of our main areas: the head, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles. So first one we're going to look at is the overhead squat assessment. So you guys know I love to show my boy Rick whenever I get a chance. So we're going to look here. NASM overhead squat. That reminds me, did you guys see they released the Matrix 4 trailer today? It looks so good. I'm really excited about it. Anyway, let's see. I think we did arms fall forward last time. Let's go with, You know, we'll go low back arch. Okay.
Hey y'all, we're back, Rick and Annie. And Annie, this time I found that she's got another postural distortion. She's going through lumbo-pelvic hip postural distortion. So in an overhead squat, I may have seen her back arch a little bit. So with the back arching, now I'm looking at it saying, okay, there's a series of things that I've got to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to have you go through some rolling techniques for your TFL. So the TFL, if you make your body the shape of a box, it's right there in that front corner, like that front pocket. So I'm going to have you go and roll your TFL. And what she's going to do, she's going to go right to the hip. So here's the bony point in the front of your hips called the ASIS, okay? So you're going to go that bony point, and then right here is called the greater trochanter of the femur. That muscle is right in between these two bony points. Don't roll on bony points. Don't want to release those. Trying to release that muscle in between. Again, the TFL. So she's going to get that muscle released, and it's a really overactive muscle in a lot of folks. It likes to jump in there and take over because it has so many joint actions that it can do. The other thing that because she's in a hip flexed position, I'm looking at her saying, well, obviously I need to get her hip flexors released, but the major hip flexors in the body are the iliacus and the psoas major, and you cannot get through them through instrument-assisted tools because they're underneath the abdomen, and those are your major hip flexors. So we're going to get the muscles that we can get with the instruments we have. So Annie, what I'm going to have you do is now just roll. You're off the TFL, but onto the rectus femoris. Now, the rectus femoris is the major muscle that's in the quad. All right, but it's the only one that crosses the hip, and it is a hip flexor. So now she's going to roll over the quad. Gentlemen, be careful with this one. You're going to roll forward onto the quad. Nice, slow and control. You're going to find that first point of tension where you're like, that kind of hurts, and I don't want to be there. That's where I want you to be. So stay on that spot. Annie, you find a spot of contention. Excellent. Hold that position. And we're going to usually find about 2 places that you'll release. Hold for a minimum of 30 seconds, but we're going to expedite this a little bit. So Annie's now released her TFL. She's released her rectus femoris. So now we're going to move on into, after we've isolated this and we've released it with pressure, now we're going to lengthen it. So Annie, let me have you go into a stretching exercise. So we're now actually going to stretch her iliacus and her psoas. So she's going to go into a kneeling hip flexor stretch, and from the front with her, and I'm going to show you from the side what's going on. All she's doing, she's going to stand upright, and she's going to go into what's called a posterior tilt, tuck. Right? So if she's already in an anterior tilt, then part of the stretching is to do the opposite of that. What you can even do is have the client squeeze the glute a little bit, get some active stretch there. You can feel a stretch right here on the front of the hip. And then you see people doing these stretches where they take the arm up, they lean to the side, and they rotate. You can do that, and that's fine if you can do that. But right now, we're just going to keep it pretty simple, and we're going to go into this stretch just in the sagittal plane. We're not going to add the frontal plane or the transverse plane. So let's assume that we've gotten a good release from Annie here. So Annie's gotten the release. Let's go into some activations. So what muscles do I need to activate if I've got a client whose back arches, and I see the back arch in an overhead squat assessment? So I'm going to go, first of all, glute activation. Secondly, core activation. So Annie, come on down. I'm going to have her go into some bridges. And bridge is a great exercise for 2 reasons. The bridge is going to be great for hip extension, get the glutes to fire. But secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to get an active stretch for the hip flexors. So we're activating the opposing muscle, and the muscle that's giving us issues is getting some more stretch to it. So Annie, belly button in. She's going to go in a neutral position. You guys can cue like this. I want you to arch your back, so stick your butt out. Tuck all the way underneath, and go right to the middle. Stay right there. Do not move from that position. Belly button in. Go ahead and squeeze your glutes before you lift and drive up. So I'm going to get her to squeeze like she's coming up from the hips. Be careful that they're not arching their back, because some clients will try to show you, look, I'm giving you what you want by coming up higher. That's not what I want. All right, so neutral position. And then when she lowers down, I want her just to lower from that hinge in the hip. All right, so it's only hip. Go ahead and lift back up. She's going to squeeze the glutes tight. She might even get a little stretch on the front of the hips. Now, some people do this. They roll the spine down. Annie, can you show us rolling down, like you drop from here and then you just kind of roll down? That is not a wrong exercise, but again, we're looking for spinal stabilization. And if the spine's moving, it's not stabilizing. So come back up. I want her to be strong in hip extension without the core movement. So think about, we're prepping her to do squats. I don't want to practice spinal rolling up and down. I only want hip movement with strong core. So go ahead and drop from the hips again. And then one more time, squeeze in the backside, drive up and hold it right there. Do you feel a little bit of stretch on the front of the hips? That's absolutely cool. And one of the things you're going to get, you should ask your clients, do you feel it in your glutes? And you need to make sure that your clients know what muscle their glutes are, right? So Annie, touch where you feel this on you. Glutes, right? So if she feels it here in her hamstrings, I'm going to have her move her feet towards her butt a little bit more. Once she does that, she can probably drive from the hips more, and it'll take out that hamstring overactivation. I don't mind if you feel it in your hamstrings. What I do mind is that you feel it in your hamstrings more than you feel it in your backside. That's called synergistic dominance. We got to cut that out. All right, so Annie, go ahead and lower back down. Perfect. So we've done posterior activation. Let's have you flip over. We're going to do a few planks. So she's going to go into a plank position. And in this plank, we're only going to do 3 just to show you what we're doing. Feet are hip width apart. Belly button's going to be drawn in. And Annie, I want you to lift up. I want you to squeeze your glutes tight. I want you to lock out your quads. And let's make it harder. I want you to drive your toes down into the floor. Suck in your belly button. And drop down to the knees. Relax. We're going to do 2 more of those. Go ahead and lift back up. Everything together. Nice and strong. Abs, glutes, quads, calves. Everything's fired. Plank is in reference to a plank of wood, not the soggy spaghetti noodle planks that I'm seeing people do. We're trying to be locked out and strong. So Annie, drop down. Do 1 more super strong. Abs, glutes, quads, calves. Super tight. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Nice. Go ahead and drop down. And let's get an integrated exercise in. So Annie is now going to practice in this integrated exercise activation of the glutes and activation at the core at the same time. So go ahead and take this handle, step forward. I'm going to have Annie do a reverse lunge to balance. So she's going to really work on squeezing the glutes. And then she's going to do a chest press. As she does a chest press, she's got to stabilize her core. So now we got her backside and her front side working concurrently. So Annie, go ahead, reverse lunge, that's it, and drive forward, squeeze this glute and press forward for her abdominal activation. Go ahead, reverse lunge. I'm going to be out of the way this time. Squeezing from the backside, driving forward so this backside is firing. Abs are firing super tight. 1 more time, last one. Go ahead and drive up, squeezing the glutes, keeping the abs tight. Perfect. You see she put her foot down? I'd much rather people put their foot down than hop around like a maniac. So put your foot down, get your balance again, and stabilize. It looks really good. Go ahead and let's take a break. Guys, this is a nice little exercise. Lumbo pelvic hip dysfunction. If in an overhead squat you see somebody's back arch, we're going to release muscles like the TFL, the Rectus Femoris. We're going to stretch out the psoas. We're going to activate the glutes. We're going to activate the front of the body, so the abdominals, like the transverse abdominis, stabilize from the front. And then we're going to do an integrated exercise like a squat to press or a lunge to press, where she's activating both the glute and the abs in one exercise. So thanks so much for watching. You guys have questions, let us know. I'm Rick. This is Annie. Glad you watched.
Okay, so the reason he did like those exercises in particular, right? Like, so step 1, he would run her through like an assessment. He was like, hey, we ran Annie through an assessment. We saw that she's got a little bit of a low back arch, right? Well, we're going to run that information through our brains and go, all right, well, what does a low back arch mean? You know, we're going to take a look and see, like, every time. Why is our clients like low back arching? Which muscles are overactive? Which muscles are underactive? And if we take a look, we can even see actually. Oh, is this not gonna depixelate? Great. Let's see here. Come on, interwebs, hook me up. There we go. All right, so we take a look and we see like that excessive low back arch, right? Our probable overactive muscles are going to be the hip flexors on the front, right? The erector spinae in the back, and the latissimus dorsi in the back as well. And so we look at that. This is sometimes known as what is called lower crossed syndrome. So we have you know, when we see that excessive like arching, we see tight muscles back here in the low back. That's why the back is arching this way. The latissimus dorsi also assists with that a little bit. That's why that's on that tight muscles list. And then we see the hip flexors right here on the front. That's why he had her do that like kneeling position, right? So the tight muscles are the low back and the hips. And then that means that we have probable underactive muscles on the opposite side of each of those joints. So if we're going from the hips, the weak muscles are going to be in the glutes over here. If we go from the low back, the weak muscles are going to be in the abs over here, right? So our probable underactive muscles are the gluteus maximus and hamstrings right back here, and the intrinsic core stabilizers. So his way for fixing that was he had her do a floor bridge, which was for the glutes. He had her do a plank, which is for the abs, right? And then she would do an erector spinae, latissimus dorsi, and kneeling hip flexor stretch. So that's the solve the problem, right? That's step 2 of our assessment process. We started by identifying the problem by looking at her posture and saying, we see a low back arch, and we circle that on our little posture assessment sheet here, right? And then that tells us if the low back arches, these are the overactive muscles. I'm sorry, yeah, these are the overactive muscles, and these are the underactive muscles right here. So now we know exactly how to fix it. We've solved the problem by writing a routine to address it. Now we just got to implement it into our sessions, right? We need to train our client. So we've got a lot of different movement assessments that are out there. The biggest one that we're going to see is the overhead squat. And while we're looking at the overhead squat, the things that we're paying attention to is we're looking to see, do the feet flatten in this way, or do the feet turn out? Both of those things are going to mean different things depending on the client, right? So if we look and we see the foot turns out, where's my list go? So if we look to see that the foot turns out, our overactive muscles are these calf muscles, and maybe a little bit in like the hamstring complex, right? So like the soleus, the gastrocnemius, and the hamstrings there are probably what's causing those feet to turn out when my client squats. So those are really, really tight. I need to loosen these things up. Then I can strengthen the stuff that's going to draw their feet back to neutral. That's going to be the anterior tibialis on the front of the shin, and the posterior tibialis as well. And then the gluteus maximus and gluteus medius, so that that hamstring can stop taking over, right? So that's how we are going to sort of address those things. And then what if we see our client's knees cave in, right? What if that's the postural distortion? As our client's squatting, we see the knees buckle this way, right? Well, now, what muscles cause the knees to cave in? Well, that's going to be your adductor complex for sure. But also, you've got that hip internal rotator that's turning the femur this way, like that. That's causing this cave-in action as well. That's called your tensor fascia latae, or your TFL, right? Which is that little hip flexor on the side. So what do we need? What's the opposite of the TFL? That's the gluteus maximus. What's the opposite of the adductors? That's my gluteus medius. And then we know that strengthening the feet a little bit, the shins again, to draw those feet back properly will also have a pretty positive effect on that as well. But these are probably the two, really, really big ones. What if we see our client's low back arch? Again, it means the same thing we talked about: tight low back muscles, weak abdominals, tight hip flexor muscles, weak gluteus and hamstring muscles. What if we see an excessive forward lean, right? When our client squats, they kind of do that thing where they like stick their butt out like this. It's like more of a hinge than it is an actual squat. Well, that means that like we take a look at it, and that means that like either the calves are really tight, or possibly the hip flexors are really tight and the abdominals. Now, this is an interesting one because this can be kind of challenging to determine, like, is it my calves or is it the hip flexors and abdominals? Separating those and figuring out what is the actual cause is going to have, you're going to have to try this instead. Elevate heels. So what you need to do to figure out, like, if it's the hips or if it's the abs, you actually want to elevate your client's heels. So what you can do is you can put them, in this case, they're putting them on like a piece of wood here. But you can just use plates at the gym. I'll even just have my clients use their shoes. But when you elevate their heels, if all of a sudden their squat improves and like it looks perfect after doing that, that is going to tell us that the problem is the calf muscles. The calf muscles are way too tight, and that's actually what's causing this. But if you see that like they still excessively lean forward, even though you're elevating the heels, then the problem is not the ankles. It's in fact the the hip flexors and abdominals. So that's what we're going to look for there, and then you can see that in this sheet right here. So excessive lean, soleus and gastrocnemius, those are the calves, or hip flexors, abs, and obliques. So weak muscles, that's going to be the hamstring complex, the gluteus maximus, or the lumbar extensors, right? Those low back muscles that would draw your client back, you know, instead of leaning forward, that would draw them this way. And then lastly, if we're looking at our client and we see that their arms are falling forward, right? They're not able to keep their arms in line with their ears. That's going to be caused by tight latissimus dorsi muscles, right? So the latissimus dorsi is overactive. And then we see the pectoral muscles, pectoralis major and pectoralis minor there. So they're really tight in the chest here. They're really tight under the arms here. And then they're also really tight in what is called your teres major, which is a rotator cuff muscle in your actual shoulder. And so that's a rotator cuff muscle that's in charge of rotating your arm this way. So what do we need to do? We need to get them better at rotating their arm this way. We need to bring it back the opposite direction. So strengthening instead of like the rounding shoulder muscles like the pectoralis, we need to strengthen the trapezius muscles, the middle and lower trapezius behind the shoulder blades, the rhomboids between the shoulder blades, the posterior deltoid on the back of the arm here, and the rotator cuff, which is going to rotate your arm, you know, externally instead of internally. All of those things are going to have positive effects. So that is the sort of general posture stuff there. Like I said, we've also got, you know, the overhead squat is going to, you know, tell us about all, it's putting stress on those 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, and a little bit on the cervical spine. We've also got a single leg squat assessment, which you can do to also test your client's balance and ankle proprioception. And then we've also got pushing and pulling assessments, although we don't normally do those with, we don't do single leg or pushing and pulling as commonly with youths, just because they are a little bit more technical. And again, kids usually have a like slightly shorter attention span. And so the technical stuff is a little bit harder to coach. But if you decide to do the pushing and the pulling, we're basically going to look to see, do they have that low back arch? Do their shoulders elevate, or do they have a forward head posture? All of those things are indicating overactive and underactive muscles. So those are your posture assessments, and that tells us what stretches and what strengthening exercises to give our clients. You know, I could have 2 clients both starting on the same day, both starting in the stabilization phase. But if one client's like a knees cave in person and the other one's a low back arch person, their workouts are going to be slightly different because they have different needs. And then in that performance category as well, this is sort of out of order, but like I mentioned, we also have the Davies test. That's where you set 2 pieces of tape. Now, with an adult, it's 36 inches apart. With kids, you can make that about 24 inches apart. And they're going to reach where they bring, you know, they go from a push-up position like this, and then they bring one hand over and they touch, and then they bring that hand back, and then they bring the opposite hand over and touch, and then they bring the hand back, and they get as many touches as they can in 15 seconds. And this is testing, you know, their core strength and rotator cuff stabilization. It's an upper body agility assessment. We're seeing how well they can change direction back and forth. And then we got the Sharks skill test, which is basically where you put your client into a 3x3 grid. Picture of a shark. 3x3 grid, 12-inch boxes, and you have them on one leg jump from box to box to box to box to box, and you test how long it takes them to get through that. And that will tell you about their lower body agility and lower body stabilization. So both of those are also really good. And you can test your client, you know, when they come in, and you can test them again later on and see, like, are they actually improving? So before developing any exercise program, it's really important to make sure to understand all of the components of a good fitness assessment, so that you understand how your client moves and sort of what their starting points are as an individual, so that you can write the program that's going to be most catered specifically to them. Like I said, when it comes to program design, you could pull out a deck of cards. It's not actually going to be that bad. It's going to burn a lot of calories. You know, you could throw darts at a dartboard and pick your exercises and reps that way as well. It's not going to be terrible, but it'll never be as good as a specific workout that is designed exactly for your client. So in order to figure out like how to design something for our client, we have to look both at subjective and objective information. The subjective information is going to fill in information about our client's sort of history and backstory, so that we know exactly what's going on with them. And then the objective information is going to tell us about their current status. Always start with a PAR-Q. Always start with that subjective stuff. The PAR-Q is going to, you know, determine whether or not your client should even engage in an exercise program, and then get into that objective information where we're going to take a look at their body composition. We're going to take a look at their posture. We're going to take a look at their cardio. We're going to take a look at their strength. And all of those things are going to be what we sort of base our exercise program on. There's the Sharks test. I think the slide's out of order. Yeah, that's about it, guys. I will definitely attach all of that stuff to tonight's email base so that you can have a copy of it. But do you guys have any questions or comments today?
I'm good.
Love that. Feeling good, guys?
All good.
Cool. All right. Well, that is your assessment review. You know, we like to do it every mod. Hopefully you guys got a little bit of extra information here and there. I like those fun little, like I love this youth assessment lecture, because like the right angle push-up test and the curl up test and the long jump test, those are really fun ones that I love to do with my client. If I sit down like and their subjective stuff, I'm like, what are your goals? And they're like, I want to get more athletic. I love throwing those 3 assessments at someone. And then, you know, those are some of my favorite things to do with people. All right, guys, I'm going to kick you all out of here. And I will see you guys tomorrow.
See you later,
Okay,
Brad. Have a good day.
bye. Have a good one. Bye-bye.